Krishna Kanteya Prabhu would like to lead Kirtan, that would be great. And Maharaj, normally we haven't been doing an intro on Thursdays, but for the sake of continuity, I'm going to start.
Say it again.
Normally we haven't been doing an intro on on Thursday evenings, but because I've started doing it on the other evenings, I'm going to do it tonight too. Just letting you know. Krishna Kanteya Prabhu, are you able? Okay. Here he is. Okay. Okay, I will start unless he starts in the next 3 seconds. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Jai Om Vishnupad Parimansa Pariprajkacharya Ashto Tarasata Shri Shrimad AC Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda ki jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai. Prem Sikaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Sham Kund Radha Kund Giri Govardhan ki jai. Vrindavan Dham ki jai. Navadip Dham ki jai. Jagannath Puri ki jai. Ganga Mahi ki jai. Jamuna Mahi ki jai. Tulsi Devi ki jai. Bhakti Devi ki jai. Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. Gaur Premanande.
Hari Hari Bol. Jai Maharaj, thank you very much. Welcome everyone to tonight's reading of Caitanya Charitamrita with His Holiness Jayādvaita Swami. Today is March 23rd, 2023, and it's a day later in India. And I do not have a script yet for this intro for reading the chapter, so Maharaj, if you can bring us up to speed. As always, we're eager to hear everyone's comments and questions, so please use the raise hand feature or unmute yourself and speak when Maharaj asks for questions, or you can type your comments into the chat window. And we ask, please, that you don't type anything or post anything in the chat window when Maharaj is reading there, because it gets all wonky.
Very much to Priya, and thank you to all. We're at Caitanya Charitamrita Adi Lila chapter 5, text 62. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. I'll give you the second shot. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadama Yam Dadati Shupadant. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Chitaparakam Shri Gurun Vaishnavash Shri Rupam Sagar Shatam Sahagana Laganatan Vitamistans Sadvaitam Sadhutam Rijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Sri Vishakhan Vitamstra. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namost Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Namo Priya Manchako Pitarubhyascha Kripasanta Pyevacha Dita Anam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Vivashadi Gaur Bhakta. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hari Ram, Hari Ram, Ram Ram. In this chapter, Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami is glorifying Sri Nityananda Prabhu by way of glorifying Lord Balaram and Lord Balaram's expansions. Balaram Oilo Nitai. The author wants us to understand that there's no difference between Sri Nityananda Prabhu and Lord Balaram. The Purusha avatars we've heard are expansions of Lord Balaram. They expand the entire existence of the spiritual sky. And of course, not the Purusha avatars, but Lord Balaram expands the entire existence for the spiritual sky. And from the Purusha avatars, we get the expansion of the material energy. Material energy is referred as two parts: the ingredient supplying portion, and then the active portion that illusions the conditioned souls. We heard something about the ingredient portion. Now we're going to hear more about the other portion. Maya angshe kohitare nimitta karom sheha nohe yate karta hetu nara. The Maya aspect of material nature is the immediate cause of the cosmic manifestation, but it cannot be the real cause, for the original cause is Lord Narayan. Kater nimitta hetu joiche kumbhakar and kumbhakar vaiche jagater karta purushavatar. Just as the original cause of an earthen pot is the potter, so the creator of the material world is the first Purusha incarnation, Karandakshay Vishnu. Krishna Karta Mayatar Koren Shahai Pater Korum Prapradhanyan. Lord Krishna is the creator, Maya only helps him as an instrument, just like the potter's wheel and other instruments, which are the instrumental causes of a pot. So this, by this example, we're meant to understand the position of the material energy. The materialists, the materialistic scientists, and so on, everything's very simple. There's nature, and nature causes everything. Nature is the cause. Nature means matter, exists, and matter is responsible for everything we see. Nature produces all. Very simple. But Kaviraj Goswami says, no, it doesn't work like that. It's not that because you see a potter, rather you see a pot and you see mud and you see a potter's wheel, you say it's all very simple. The wheel turns and the pot, mud is there and the pot is created. You don't need anything more than that. No, the potter has to do it. It's not that the spinning wheel and the mud on their own will produce a pot. We need the potter behind the whole show, moving the wheel, shaping the pot. So, all right, the ingredients of Maya and the actions of Maya may explain the existence of the material world, but how is it that Maya is working in a particular way? Where is Maya coming from? What is the original source of these ingredients? What is making Maya work? For that, we have to look toward Narayan, the personality of Godhead. That's what we're hearing. Dura hoite purusha kore mayate abadhan shiva rupa birya tate korem. The first purusha casts his glance at Maya from a distance, and thus he impregnates her with the seed of life in the form of the living entities. The materialists are at a loss to give an adequate explanation of consciousness. In our practical experience, there are two things. There's matter, and there's something different which we call consciousness. The materialist may try to explain that consciousness also proceeds from matter, but now they're outside the realm of science. They're dealing in mysticism or gross theoretical speculation without any demonstration for what they're talking about, without any process that can be reasonably described somehow or other. Consciousness comes from matter. But from Shastra, we understand consciousness comes from consciousness. From the supreme conscious personality of Godhead, you get the living beings. Prabhupada summarized this one time to a challenging materialist. Sir, can you prove that there is God? Prabhupada said, yes, there's the Mother Nature, and their children, living entities. Therefore, there must be a Father. So that's practical. The mother doesn't alone give birth to the child. The mother needs to be impregnated by the father. So material nature is impregnated with the seeds of the living entity by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Eka anga bhashe kore mayate milon maya hoite janme tobe ramantir gon. The reflected rays of his body mix with Maya, and thus Maya gives birth to myriad universes. Purport. The Vedic conclusion is that the cosmic manifestation, visible to the eyes of the conditioned soul, is caused by the absolute truth, personality of Godhead, through the exertion of his specific energies. Although in the conclusion of atheistic deliberations, this manifested cosmic exhibition is attributed to material nature. The energy of the absolute truth is exhibited in three ways: spiritual, material, and marginal. The absolute truth is identical with his spiritual energy. Only when contacted by the spiritual energy can the material energy work, and the temporary material manifestations thus appear active. In the conditioned state, living entities of the marginal energy are a mixture of spiritual and material energies. The marginal energy is originally under the control of the spiritual energy, but under the control of the material energy, the living entities have been wandering in forgetfulness within the material world since time immemorial. The conditioned state is caused by misuse of the individual independence of the spiritual platform. For this separates the living entity from the association of the spiritual energy. But when the living entity is enlightened by the grace of the Supreme Lord, or his pure devotee, and becomes inclined to revive his original state of loving service, he is on the platform, the most auspicious platform of eternal bliss and knowledge. The marginal Jiva, or living entity, misuses his independence and becomes averse to the eternal service attitude when he independently thinks he's not energy, but the energetic. This misconception of his own existence leads him to the attitude of lording it over material nature. So here again, as we found in the purports to Srimad Bhagavatam the other day, Srila Prabhupada tells us that the living entity is in this conditioned state, that we're in this conditioned state, ultimately because of misuse of our tiny independence. Anadikal say, since time immemorial. You can close the window so the dog will be less. I don't know if you're hearing this dog in the background. No business bark. Outside. The living entity has been kicking around in the material world since time immemorial because of misuse of independence, by which he descends from the spiritual platform to the material platform because of becoming averse to the service of the Lord. Material nature appears to be just the opposite of the spiritual energy. The fact is that the material energy can work only when in contact with the spiritual energy. Originally, the energy of Krishna is spiritual, but it works in diverse ways, like electrical energy, which can exhibit the functions of refrigerating or heating through its manifestations in different ways. The material energy is spiritual energy, covered by a cloud of illusion or plan. Therefore, material energy is not self-sufficient in working. Krishna invests his spiritual energy into material energy, and then it can act, just as iron can act like fire after being heated by fire. Material energy can act only when empowered by the spiritual energy. This is another point, that Krishna's energy is all spiritual, but a portion of it is directed by the Lord to act materially. And that material energy only acts with the touch, when touched by the spiritual energy, just as iron becomes hot only when touched by fire. All right, I see a hand there.
Thank you, Maharaj. So
Yes.
just to get some clarity, this idea of that everything is spiritual, but the spiritual energy covered by a cloud of illusion is material energy. So my understanding is that because of a certain type of consciousness, we see what is actually spiritual as material. But that's a little confusing to me because, and I'm going to wrap the question up soon. It's a little confusing to me because, on one hand, he says it's all spiritual, but the illusion is what makes it appear material. And then on the other hand, he says it's material energy that the Lord injects his spiritual energy into. So I'm wondering to myself, in the spiritual world, there are objects. There are things like chairs and pots and houses and things that are objects, but they're also spiritual. So I'm thinking, is it in this material world, there are objects and we say those things are material because we're in illusion, but they're actually spiritual, except we're in illusion, so we see them as matter. And so there's a different kind. Ravindra Prabhu is fond of saying sometimes that Prabhupada told him there are different kinds of spirit. So in actuality, the table or the chair or the rug is spiritual energy, but because of my illusion, I see it as matter. Is that a correct way of seeing it?
Yes. In the Bhagavad Gita, Brahmarpanam, Brahmahavir, Brahmagno, Brahmanavantam, Brahmaiva Tena Gantavyam, Brahmakarma Samadhim. The Lord says that when a sacrifice is performed to satisfy him, then everything becomes spiritual. The offering becomes spiritual, the ghee becomes spiritual, fire becomes spiritual. What's offered, everything, the performer becomes spiritual. And Prabhupada comments that the process of sacrifice is the process of the process of sacrifice is the process of transforming everything back into spirit. Sarvakalavidam Brahma, everything is ultimately spirit. But now these things are material. Fire, the butter, the performer. Because they're being diverted from the service of the Lord. They're being diverted from the service of the Lord. But originally they're spirit. They're spirituals. They're the spiritual energy of Krishna. So when we perform sacrifice, whether it's the classical Vedic sacrifice or it's the Sankirtan Yajna, we're transforming spirit back into spirit. Originally it's spirit. It's been temporarily manifested as non-spiritual. Now again, it's being spiritualized. And probably we use the example of the dictaphone or the microphone, which would be spiritualized, re-spiritualized by being engaged in the service of Krishna. So everything is originally or always spiritual energy of Krishna, but when it's directed away from Krishna or directed toward forgetfulness of Krishna, then it's manifested as what we call material. But when it's used for Krishna, it becomes spiritual. Probably another example he gave, that this is a temple and next door it's a house. Because here Krishna is the center and next door the owner and his sense gratification are the center. So as soon as the matter, the wood, the stone is reconnected with Krishna, we say this is a spiritual place, this is a temple, because it's reconnected with Krishna. Is that okay?
Yes, if I can ask a follow-up. So does that mean then, because I always use this example, but we hear of, there was a pot of milk on the stove when Mother Yashoda was feeding baby Krishna, and the pot of milk, I've read this, was what wanted Mother Yashoda's attention, so it decided to boil over to distract Mother Yashoda from. So that pot of milk is conscious. So then when we say it's a person, so when we say, like, I've got the kartals in my hands, I've been told that this is Lord Balaram, this is his energy. Obviously, I don't see it that way, but I'm wondering to myself, if anything, any object, I can understand objects in the material world are persons and have consciousness, but does that mean that if we see something in this material world as Krishna's energy, if we really have that vision, does that mean that thing is conscious, or is it a kind of spirit that isn't a person, isn't conscious as a living entity? So I'm kind of, I guess what I'm asking is everything a living entity and we're just not seeing it, or are we making a distinction, the different kinds of spirits, that something can be spiritual but not have personality?
Well, the first thing is that we'll understand these things when we come to the Paramahansa platform. At our present state of vision, if we can see spirit and matter, we're doing well. The materialist only sees matter. Those who are a little more fortunate can see matter and spirit. And those who are on the highest platform see only spirit. On the spiritual platform, it's not that everything has to be a jiva. The Lord has his energies. Not everything is manifest or represented by a jiva. But how personality manifests in the spiritual world, that we'll see. But maybe not now.
Thank you.
Saraswati says, so if inanimate objects in the spiritual world are all sentient and can communicate and interact independently with all the other animate inhabitants of the spiritual world, then are those inanimate objects marginal energies, jivas? I think we just answered that question. The entities in the spiritual world may be jivas, or they may be some other manifestation of Krishna's spiritual energy. Yashoda Mai is not a jiva. Radharani is not a jiva. But they're certainly animate and conscious. Gurudas says, Doubting Thomas, I just had a conversation with my ChatGPT by Google app on my computer. I'm glad I don't have ChatGPT, whatever that is, on my computer. Then he beat me in a game of chess. My good friend discusses his problems with his computer and gets, he says, original advice. He even told my friend some bawdy St. Patrick's Day jokes with subtlety and inflection. Now is the heyday of AI, artificial intelligence. And you argue life only comes from life, yesterday's news. Who knows what tomorrow will bring? I'm not sure that today is the heyday of artificial intelligence. One might more accurately say that artificial intelligence has had its heyday. If I'm not going too far out, and we'll see if I'm going too far out. Let's see, and Doug is here to correct me if I'm going too far out. The scientists distinguish between what they sometimes call hard AI and soft AI. In the soft AI, you can program computers to do things. you give them a whole batch of choices, and by mathematical assignment of values, you train, as it were, the computer to give the most appropriate response. And we understand that the computer is not conscious, but it's acting in very clever ways that mimic consciousness or display the same outcomes that a conscious living being might come up with. And we all more or less sign on to that. We understand that. And that's what businesses are doing when they have their bots that answer questions for you and so on. But the proponents of hard AI would say that if we just refine our algorithms sufficiently, if we just make progress more and more, we'll finally come to the point where there's really no distinction between a conscious living being and a computer. The computer will essentially have all the attributes of consciousness. There'll be no appreciable difference between the computer and the living being, except that one is based on flesh and blood and neurons and so on, and the other is based on silicon and other such ingredients. But the same thing will be there, consciousness on both sides. As far as I understand, the hard AI agenda has run into insuperable difficulties. Consciousness turns out to be a lot harder to map than we had hoped. And there are theoretical problems with the notion that the computer becomes conscious. Famously, our John Searle at Berkeley, who's a materialist, by the way, but a subtle and thoughtful materialist, has offered the now classic Chinese room example, in which you have a room and you have slips of paper with symbols on them that are introduced into the room. And you have people sitting in the room who are supplied with a rule book. And the rule book says, when you see a squiggle, squiggle, then make it a squoggle, squoggle. Transform symbol A into symbol B, according to these rules. And the result will be a translation from Chinese to English, or from English to Chinese. And so the slips are introduced into the computer that is into the room. And lo and behold, as the phrase goes, out comes English. So one might argue then that the room or the inhabitants of the room or the whole system knows Chinese and English. It's as aware as a bilingual person. But he argues that no, it's just symbols being transformed from one to another according to certain rules by people or a system who have no idea what these rules mean. So in a similar way, the computer, which we hoped would have all the features of consciousness, is not going to be any more conscious than the Chinese room. It may transform A to B, but it won't understand what A is. It won't understand what B is, nor will it understand why A should be transformed into B. This is a serious obstacle for the proponents of hard AI. And from what I understand, hard AI, which really was getting a lot of hope invested in it, is sort of on the back burner somewhere, or somewhere off to the side, where we hope that perhaps something might come out of it, but it really hasn't delivered the kind of promises that we were expecting. Is that fair, Doug?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Yes, that is fair. I was actually just writing in the chat that that's very well said. I mean, we can surely be sufficiently duped by an AI that it's a living being, but that's a fault of our own capabilities and shortcomings. And it's not an actual challenge to the fact that life comes from life. It's just our own shortcoming.
Thank you. Yeah, by our own shortcomings, we think, my God, the computer is conscious, but it's not. It's not. We think it's as good as conscious. No, it's not. And Murray Gupta says, materialist intelligence is already artificial. So what's the value of an artificial version of something already artificial? When ChatGPT has a spiritual experience and changes as a result, it would be interesting. Thank you. Okay. So essentially, Doubting Thomas here is a bluffer. He's proposing that these machines have consciousness the way we do, and we're not impressed. Even unsophisticated machines or unsophisticated programs, a calculator, for example, on my phone, can add up, long strings of numbers of multiple digits far more quickly than I ever could, and more accurately also. But to argue then that my calculator app is conscious is not likely to go very far. People know better. And Sadhaputta Prabhu brings us down to the lower levels. We look at it as a higher level, and we say the app knows the answer. He brings it down to the digital level, where just one value is being transferred from here to there. Or if you go to machine language, it's all ones and zeros being moved from one place to another. And if you bring it down below that, really what you have is charges that reach a certain threshold and are therefore recognized as ones, or don't reach a certain threshold and are therefore recognized as zeros. So you have these nodes, or we'll call them a node, where either there's a charge or there's no charge, or there's a sufficient charge or insufficient charge, and they're just being turned on and off according to some sort of mechanical plan, mechanical arrangement. So is that what we call consciousness?
Well, you were just as... Please go ahead, Maharaj.
And then he takes that to the cerebral level and says, offers the same question. That's what's going on in the brain also. We talk about neurons, or we talk about dendrites, and all of these neurological structures that we might find in the nervous system or the brain. And really all that's going on is that there's an electrical charge of this or that magnitude. Or if you take it down further, some chemicals are being stimulated or activated, And so there's more of this chemical doing this, or more of that chemical doing that. And so we say, this is this and this is that. There's neural activity here, there's neural activity there. So he's conscious. But is that consciousness, is that really what consciousness is? Just the presence or absence of certain chemical reactions going on? Is that what consciousness really consists of? Okay.
No, I was just gonna say, you just covered my point
Oh, okay.
about the neurons. I did want to just comment, your conversation earlier with Tulsi Priya Prabhu about how there can be a form of spiritual nature that is not a jiva. That's a new idea for me that I've never contemplated before. So I want to thank you very much for giving me that understanding.
Yeah, we have Yoga Maya, that's Jiva. We have Lakshmi Devi, who's not a Jiva. We have so many non-Jivas at work in the spiritual world. Yeah. Ketra, what is that? Vishnu Shakti Paraprokta, the whole spiritual world is manifested by the spiritual energy of Balaram. But it's not that everything has to be a jiva. But against the background of the spiritual world manifest by Lord Balaram's energy, jivas are acting and other entities are acting. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you, Guru Das. Tulsi Priya had some devil's advocate stuff.
Yes, Maharaj. So when you were using the example earlier, Prabhupada was asked for, I think he said it was proof of existence of God. And he used the example that material nature is mother. You know, when there's a mother, there's a father. I was thinking that I could imagine that, you know, somebody with a materialistic concept would say that's begging the question. Because if you have, in the material sense, a mother and a father, the mother supplies material ingredients and the father also supplies material ingredients. And so you're presupposing that there is such a thing as consciousness. And as you were saying before, we're reducing consciousness down to either, you know, electrical impulses or chemical reactions or a combination of.
Go ahead.
Sorry?
I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
So I actually used this argument with somebody, you know, I forget the context now, but I said, you know, they said, well, you know, everything is a product of nature. And I said, well, where there's mother's nature, there has to be a father, you know, because they were trying to deny the existence of, you know, a spiritual self. And I didn't get an answer back, but I'm just thinking that a materialist would say that saying that there's a father does not automatically imply that there's a spiritual element or a consciousness. So
all right, so taking that, they'll say that you've argued that there must be, that the father impregnates the mother with a living entity. All right, even if you don't accept that the living entity is something different from matter, it's something conscious, but the mother doesn't on her own produce a child. Whatever you think the father supplies, without him supplying it, the mother won't give birth. That's a fact. You can't argue that it's a circular argument or begging the question. That's only linguistic. The mother alone will never produce a child. Something has to be supplied by the father. So we have material nature. And on its own, there's no evidence that material nature can produce consciousness. there's no evidence that material nature can produce consciousness. From material nature, you get matter. And you can get as much matter as you want, but you don't get consciousness. And if you have evidence to the contrary, feel free. But so far, we only have your post-dated check that in the future we'll show you something. So our regular experience is that the father impregnates the mother gives birth. So if there are children and there's a mother, then we understand there must be a father. So there's material nature, and there are the living entities. Therefore, Prabhupada said there must be a father. That's all. Of course, the materialist, under no circumstances, will take that as a sufficient argument. He has to argue somehow to the contrary, because otherwise he has to accept the existence of God, which he's not going to do, come hell or high water.
Well, taking that a little further, what is artificial insemination if not the mother taking a material elements from a father of her choice or whatever, and combining it with her elements, and it seems like an ideal argument for material combination producing life.
No, it's a terrible argument. Doesn't demonstrate what it's supposed to demonstrate. If the woman gets raped, she may not be having a child according to the father of her choice, but she'll get pregnant because the father is there introducing the seed into the womb of the mother. Pregnancy may result. So your artificial insemination doesn't mean that you've taken matter and played with it in a certain way. And now if you take that, what's the word, modified or supercharged matter and introduce it into the body of the mother, now you'll get a child. Artificial insemination means that from some father somewhere, you're getting the seed.
But the devotee
Father
argues,
has to be there. The father has to be there.
but the
You can't argue
devotee,
that. And that's exactly the argument that Kaviraj Goswami is disputing here. That you're saying, well, it's all the pot and the wheel. And he says, no, there has to be a potter. You can't just get the pot and the wheel and say, we've explained everything. You can't just say, here we have this petri dish with XYZ stuff in it, and now the woman's pregnant, so here it is, matter, life comes from matter. No, you just look back a little bit and you see that there was a father. And the identity of the father may be hidden by a scientific, by a particular protocol, but there's a father. That we know. So that argument doesn't show anything.
well, but your devotee argument, I'm still being the doubting Thomas, by the way. Your devotee argument says that by taking this artificial insemination somehow or other, that spirit soul is injected into the semen of that artificial insert. You're arguing that there's a divine process paying attention to that artificial insemination and injecting.
No, I'm not arguing the divine process. I'm saying that for the woman to get pregnant, There has to be a seed coming from a living being, from a father. That you have to admit. Anything metaphysical we'll talk about in a moment. But first thing is you have to admit that this is not just a combination of chemicals that you've taken off the shelf. There's a father. And by the touch of the energy of the father, the mother has become pregnant. That you have to accept. That you have to accept. So there's material nature, Mother Nature. But we see that by no amount of known combinations, permutations, transformations, or anything else does nature on its own produce consciousness. You may propose that it does, you may speculate that it does, you may insist that it does, but you can't show that it does. You have no respectable scientific evidence showing that consciousness, that you can produce consciousness from any amount of material elements. When Prabhupada mockingly would say, if the chicken's egg is yellow and white, so if I give you some white and some yellow, can you produce consciousness? Or our Swarup Damodar Maharaj asked the scientists that you say life is produced from this and that and the other element. If I give you all the elements you ask for, can you produce consciousness? Can you produce life? And the scientists answered, that I do not know, or that I cannot say. So there's something other than your material elements that needs to be introduced into the system. Otherwise, you're not going to get life. And what is that something else? It's life. You may call life whatever you want to call it, or attribute it to whatever you want to attribute it to. But without that element, that different element being introduced into the system, all you'll get is matter transforming itself in different ways, and you'll never get consciousness.
But your devotee argument is that the Bhagavatam describes the process that due to his past fruitive activities, the consciousness is injected into semen.
Now, why are you dragging Bhagavatam into this? Why are you dragging Bhagavatam into this?
Okay.
I haven't said anything about that. I've simply said that if you take your system of material elements and don't introduce anything from outside that system, all you'll get is more material elements or different patterns of material elements, but you won't get life. Until you introduce life, whatever that is, from outside the system, you won't have life in the system. That's all I've said. You don't have to drag Bhagavatam into this.
Mm-hmm. But you are insisting that we accept something mystical or...
Not mystical, this is practical.
Mm.
Unless the father comes in touch with the mother, you won't have a child. That's not mysticism. That's practical experience. That's practical experience. And it's also not mystical that if you have any amount of material elements and the freedom to do with them whatever you want, you're not able to show that you're able to produce life. Then Sadhaputta Prabhu was given a mathematical argument from information theory to demonstrate why you won't be able to come up with something as complex as a living being. But leaving aside that argument, which deserves to be amply considered, simple thing, you have matter, as much matter, any kind of matter as you want, and you have unlimited time, and you have any kind of transformation, known transformation that you want to bring about, the laws of nature. So you've got unlimited stuff, unlimited time, unlimited transformations with which to manipulate the stuff, and still you don't get consciousness. And as soon as you introduce consciousness from outside the system is full of consciousness. You have a petri dish with nothing growing. As soon as you introduce one little tiny microorganism, you come back some hours later, a day later, and it's full of living beings. But in the absence of introduction of some living being, you won't get life. The historically Pasteur was dealing, he had his microbial theory, which till then was not accepted. He proposed that when some growth of living entities appeared in your test tube, it was due to these little microbes. And they said, no, it's not. It's the nature of the stuff that produces them. And he went through various kinds of ways to rule out all their explanations. Finally, I remember he had a test tube and then a kind of a pipe that was curved in such a way that nothing could come through it. And it was heated, and nothing, given any amount of time, nothing grew within the test tube. And he argued from this that the growth within the test tube was due to the introduction of these microbes, foreign elements that had entered the system. And eventually, of course, we won. And so we have the modern pharmaceutical industry. But so he was essentially arguing the same thing. They were arguing that under certain optimum conditions, life will spontaneously arise. And when he heated the solution in his test tube, they argued that no, you've destroyed the conditions. You've messed up the stuff. That's why life is not appearing. So then he came up with this clever way of doing it. All right, we'll leave this stuff alone, but we'll heat up the curved neck of this test tube, and still you'll see that no life comes. So eventually they had to throw up their hands and surrender. So essentially they were arguing spontaneous generation, which is the same theory being argued today. They were defeated. There's a comment from Doug. I know I'm going over time, but I'll do it for a moment or two. Is there a physicalist notion for how consciousness could be proven? It seems to me that even if you could perfectly map the brain and correlate it with certain conscious states, all you've done is just that. You've shown correlations. If the rooster crows every time the sun rises, that doesn't mean the rooster causes the sun to rise. There's just a correlation. Yeah, and that's essentially what they've shown. And they'll do that, of course. The neurobiologists will be very active in impressing us, perhaps justifiably, with their ability to map certain experiences to certain areas of the brain. Vision is mapped to this place, this kind of pain is mapped to that place. But all they've shown is a correlation. They haven't shown causation. So you're quite right. Is there a physicalist notion for how consciousness could be proven? That I can't say. I can't say what the physicalists might come up with. But so far, they haven't come up with anything that looks persuasive to me. And Tulsi Priya says that if you inject dead semen, dead sperm into the system, the woman won't get pregnant. It has to be live sperm. So yes. All right, we're a couple minutes over. And would someone like to lead Kirtan?
Doug or Gurudas Prabhu?
Well, you were here last night. I led last night.
You can go more than once. Dead air is not good when you're having a broadcast, a program.
I can do it if you like.
Hey, Haribol.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Paripurajaka Kacharya Stotras Shri Srimad A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Koti Vaishnavindra Ki Jai. Nam Shri Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Sakaho Sri Caitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Jayādvaita Gadadhar Shiva Shadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Sri Sri Radha Krishna Gopinath Sham Kund Radha Kund Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai, Navadvip Dham Ki Jai, Jagannath Puri Ki Jai, Gangamai Ki Jai, Jamunamai Ki Jai, Tulsi Devi Ki Jai, Bhakti Devi Ki Jai, Samaveta Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. Go Premanande Haribo. Thank you, Shara. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Maharaj. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Please share the class links with your friends. I hope we will see you all again tomorrow, Friday, for Maharaj's Srimad Bhagavatam class. Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Right.
Jayādvaita Maharaj Ki Jai.
Right.
Samaveta Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai.
Right.
Haribo.
Jai Maharaj Haribo.
I agree.
Maharaj, Doug had to run, had to take a work call, but thank you on his behalf.
Thank you so much. Hare
Thanks for
Krishna.
the kirtan, Shara. It was very lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you, Shraddha. Thank you to all. Hare Krishna.